60 years ago today. Orwell's 1984 was published. Yeah, how about that? This is from The Guardian of the UK. 60 years ago today, George Orwell's 1984 was published. And this evening, why, as a matter of fact, it's probably over by now, given the time differential. Anyway, this evening, to mark the anniversary of Orwell's last book before he died, the former head of the government commission or government communication headquarters, a guy named Sir David Pepper. Now, the government communications headquarters in the UK, that's where they do all the domestic spying. That's kind of like our entire government, I guess. But over there, it's called the Government Communications HQ, or GCHQ. Anyway, Sir David Pepper came out of the shadows to tell the BBC's Who's Watching You program, the audience for that program, that it has become necessary for the government in the UK to record all data from phone and internet traffic in the fight against terror. You see, see, we're worried over here. A court here recently, I think it was last week, ruled that the telecom companies are completely free. They're off the hook now. That little effort to hold them accountable has been flushed down the memory hole or the toilet, depending on how you want to see that. But in the UK, Sir David Pepper slips from the shadows to tell the BBC's Who's Watching You program earlier this evening that it's become necessary for the government to record all data from phone and internet traffic in the fight against terror. Pepper makes a case for the total surveillance of society on the program, apparently, in order to catch the increasingly sophisticated targets. He says, quote, "There are plenty of people who would do all they can to make themselves difficult to find. The thing you worry about most is the attack that you haven't seen coming," end quote. Never mind. I certainly couldn't explain anything to Sir David Pepper, the former head of the GCHQ. Now, in the UK, as here actually, except we are functionally illiterate in this society, in the UK, the unknown enemy is cast very much like the ill-defined threat presented to Oceania in 1984. The threat in 1984 and the threat to the UK now is a pervasive, cunning, and unseen foe that requires total watchfulness, and it follows the sacrifice of the essential right to privacy. Yes. Now, Sergeant Pepper, it's Sir David Pepper's solution to the problem of tracking terrorist communications is to surveil everything, which gives the government their enormous powers and would very likely become subject to the law of function creep. In this country, we call it mission creep. Over there, apparently, they call it function creep. As all these measures usually are. Now, the writer of this, Henry Porter, for The Guardian of the UK, says, "Last week I reported on how the police national DNA database," well, my goodness, we were just talking about that. The National Police DNA database set up to solve crime was now being used in parts of the UK as a crime prevention measure. I'm not sure how that works, but we're doing the same thing here. Those who think of the novel 1984 as a prediction are, of course, in error. No, it's not a training manual either. It is an account of the forces that endanger liberty, most of which can be summed up in a single word, Henry Porter writes, and that word is lies. You see, Orwell offers a political choice between the protections of truth and the slide into expedient falsehoods for the benefit of the rulers. Oh, and the exploitation of the ruled, of course. Now, think Dick Cheney. Remember, he authorized, promoted, and insisted upon torture techniques developed by the Chinese 60 years ago, not to extract intelligence, not to get information on troop movements and this and that, but rather to get false confessions. That's what drowning, the simulated drowning or the partial drowning, that's what the tortures being used at Guantanamo and God knows where else. That's what those techniques were designed to do. That's why we had the SEER program developed to help American soldiers resist that. But the techniques were designed specifically to get confessions. Given the right amount of pressure, I can get you to confess to having sex with your mother. And I don't care if you are your mother's son or daughter. It doesn't make any difference. The novel is above all subversive. It is a volley against the authoritarian in every personality. It's a polemic against every orthodoxy and an anarchistic blast against every unquestioning conformist. Gee, I think I described every right-winger, every Republican, every brain-dead conservative in America, too. So, anyway, the 60th anniversary of the publication of 1984. And again, every one of the devices that Orwell's novel, Big Brother, used in Orwell's novel to keep track of and utterly destroy the clear thinking of the citizens of Oceania were techniques applied by the Bush crime family against anyone we could sweep up in our net. And anyone in this country. We used terror, the constant threat of terror here, over the past 8 years. We became a torture nation. There is an article in, what issue? Hold on a minute. It's in The Nation. It is in the June 15th edition of The Nation. I'm tempted to read the whole damn thing on the air. It's by Jonathan Schell about torture and truth. It is so... Jonathan Schell, of course, is the person who wrote about nuclear winter way back in the 80s. He's one of the few social philosophers of any stature or value that we have in this country. But the techniques used, the torture, that was so obvious when O'Brien was torturing Winston Smith. It was not to get him to confess, not to get him to provide information about where he and Julia, where Winston and Julia were sneaking away to have their trysts. O'Brien knew all that. O'Brien knew everything because it was all there. What they didn't like about Winston Smith was that he reserved part of his mind for Julia. And you can't do that. You must love Big Brother. And if you love Big Brother, there's no room to love anybody else. Not the kind of political love that Big Brother demanded, or Big Cheney, or Big Bush, or Big Nazi Hitler, whoever. There's no room for anything other than the devotion to the state, the devotion to the leader, dear leader. Think of Kim Il-Crazy in North Korea. Think of Mao during the Cultural Revolution. So, you know all this. I'm starting to sound lectury, but I'm not trying to be lectury because you know all this stuff. Remember what the goal was. O'Brien's goal was not to wring any information out of Winston Smith. It was to get Winston to agree to the lie. The lie being that truth and reality was whatever the state said it was. The attack on the USS Liberty, it was this. Don't pay attention to the facts. The invasion of Iraq was this. Don't pay attention to the facts. The 9/11 attack on this country was this. Don't pay any attention to the facts.